So let me press record, and then, yeah, I do. I worry about why we're sending troops places right now. But, hopefully it's nothing too serious. I don't know. Yeah, it's a tough time, isn't it? And I know there's unrest in certain cities, and I know that, people, National Guard people are going to some interesting places right now. And I don't know, it reminds me a whole lot of 1968. I know you guys are all thinking the same thing. Yeah, I'm looking at, the few of you that have your faces up there. It's like, yeah, their parents weren't even born in 68. But yeah, we've been through, if it makes you feel any better, it probably doesn't, but we've been through some pretty difficult times in our history before. I mean, we're clearly studying one of those times, and we've made it through. Now, I don't think that makes any of what we're about to go through as far as presidential election and what we're going through as far as COVID and unrest and protesting and that sort of stuff. I don't think it makes it any easier. But I mean, do know that we've been through stuff like this before, and we've come out kind of okay, but the process is unpleasant for sure. Much better to read about history than to be part of it, honestly. Yeah, unless there's something really cool going on, which I don't think there is right now. But, except this class. This class is really cool. All right. So last time we talked quite a bit about the Civil War. Yeah, and hopefully, no, you're right. Hopefully for that fellow, it is just some training. Only, I don't know how any of that works, but he got orders over the weekend. So, he was unaware that he was going until Sunday. So.
Well, unfortunately, if you got orders over the weekend, I promise you that it's definitely not for training, because we're told years in advance when our training dates are.
That was my assumption. And I sort of figure he's going to end up in Portland or something. He's going to end up someplace like that for a couple of weeks. But
if he's in the National Guard, we aren't sending any of our soldiers right now to any other states. If he was getting activated, it would probably be for the hurricane.
Oh, got it. No, and that makes sense too. And there's probably some more of those coming because it's September. So, yeah, and they do have a big cleanup to do. They do. But people will be so thrilled to have them there. So, yeah. Goodness. Yeah, you guys do good work. All right, Civil War. So we talked about why we had the Civil War. I think we talked about all the stuff on the first page of the notes, pretty much. Creation of the Freedmen's Bureau, amendments, the amendment part, of course, important for you. Also, just to say, I did finish making the quiz over 15, 16, and 17. And so either tonight or tomorrow, I'll post the list of things that you should study. Just as a reminder, your grades are your weekly questions. That's about half of your grade. So one per chapter, and then you'll have a quiz over all three chapters, 15, 16, 17, and that'll be the other half of your grade. Right now, the first quiz is going to be 8 to 10 questions. After we do the first quiz, I'll probably ask you guys if you'd rather it were longer. I'm not going to make it shorter because that's really short over the 3 chapters, but I will ask you if you'd rather have a longer quiz. And I'll wait until you take it before I ask you, because I think your natural response right now would be no, I don't want a longer quiz. But, once you have the quiz, you might think, no, if I'd had 5 more questions, maybe that would have been better. But I will definitely give you clues about what to study as well. I mean, I won't tell you everything, but it should be helpful. People over the summer seem to be okay with it. So hopefully you will as well. If not, I trust that you will let me know. All right, so amendments. Yeah, if we pass amendments, because we don't have that many, I'm always going to ask you about amendments. So, and I'll put that on the list. All right. So ways to make money. During that time period. If you lived in the South, primarily your income was tied to cotton farming. And I know we talked in general about how the South was very much an agricultural economy. The North was a little more mixed, but still an agricultural economy. It's just that the South's agriculture was primarily cotton, and the North is a more diverse agricultural economy, plus a little bit more on the industrial side, that's going to change pretty substantially as we get closer to the year 1800. But in the South, you're growing cotton. And you probably either don't own much land or don't own land at all. Because in the South, the economy, you either had rich guys or poor guys, and there's just not much in the middle for a variety of reasons. So the rich guys owned all the land. They had been plantation owners, and then after the Civil War ends, now they're just large farm owners, because I suppose not technically a plantation. And almost everybody works for them as sharecroppers. So these are people who grow cotton on somebody else's land. Oop, I gotta let somebody in, sorry. So they grow cotton on somebody else's land because they don't have any land. So, and they also may not have tools, they may not have a place to live. There's a whole lot of stuff they don't have. A lot of these guys are gonna be former slaves. So they won't get paid in a traditional sense, but what will happen is they'll get paid when the crop comes in. So they are sharing in the crop. And if they don't have money, which they probably don't, they're going to borrow against their future earnings. And so they'll have to pay back what they borrowed with interest. So it's pretty common if you're a sharecropper that by the time you get paid, you're in debt again. And in the South, they will pass laws to make sure that if you are in debt, that you can't work for anybody else until you pay off that original debt. So it's going to keep people really tied to that original boss, who might also have been the former slave owner if you were a former slave. There are going to be some people who own very small pieces of land, and they're usually not very productive. It's kind of what my old relatives would refer to as dirt farmers, but you've got very unproductive soil, which is why you can afford it. And those guys will participate in something called the crop lien system. Oh goodness, somebody had a question, sorry. All right, as far as notes, what are you doing with the notes? Okay, we'll stop and talk about that for a sec. These are the notes that I've posted. And these are really from the chapters. So all the stuff really ties back to the textbook. So these are the notes that I posted that these are things I want to go over in my lecture. So I make a short version of notes so that I'll remember to talk about the stuff, to be honest. And they are things from the chapter. So all the stuff should be tied together. How should you take notes? Okay, you know that the answer is however it works best for you, because that's always the answer in a college class. However, I also know that, especially if you're right out of high school, you may have never taken notes before because you didn't have to, because, the day before the test, somebody told you all the questions, so you just memorized those 10 things and then you were fine. But what I would do if I were you is, while I'm reading, I would just write down, 8 or 10 things that I think are important from the reading. I wouldn't write everything down, because if you write too much down, it takes too much time. But you got to decide, like, what is the most important thing. So while you're reading, just make some notes, highlight some stuff, underline it, however you do it, whatever works for you, of stuff that you think you'd want to go back and revisit. Now, like for this chapter, anything that has to do with, is Reconstruction successful or a failure? That's probably what I'm focusing on right now, because that's your big question. Now, while I'm lecturing, I would take the lecture notes and either have them open and maybe add notes to them, and you could do it in a different color or something like that, or you could handwrite them, or you could just take your own separate notes about the lecture. I'd probably use the lecture notes that I gave you and add to them, just because it might help with organization a little. But I also recognize that there's nothing about my brain that's very linear, so that the organizational strategy may not be very helpful. But you got to figure out what works best for you, and that could also change during the class. So, like, you may think, well, I'll try this, and then you guys can talk to each other however you would talk to each other in the chat or exchange information or something and say like, hey, I did this and it worked really well. And you'll also figure out too, because everybody learns differently, what works for one person won't work for another person, and you know how that works. Also, I think I'm going to stop for just a second. I'm sorry. I don't know if you noticed that I keep grabbing my shoulder. There's something wrong with my shoulder, and I have to put some ice on it, or I'm not going to be able to finish this lecture. So give me 1 second, and you guys talk to each other or text each other. I'm sorry. All right. Normally we won't get an ice pack break. I apologize. I didn't have any time. Didn't have any time between the 2 classes either. That's why I was a little late. Oh, that is so much better. Oh my God. Okay. All right. now I have to see if you guys ask any questions. Right. All right. No, so you guys are just exchanging. Yeah. No, that's smart. Okay. Yeah. And I'm definitely going to post a list tonight or tomorrow of stuff that I would study if I were you for the quiz. Yep. So you guys exchange whatever information you need to get in touch with each other. So, yeah. All right. And then, if somebody does post something, I know for whatever reason, young people like Quizlets and things like that. But if you guys make those things and want to share those things during the chat or something during class, that seems reasonable. Especially, like when I leave to go get an ice pack or something.
So the only question I have is like, for example, history comes natural for me, but
Yeah.
the only thing is like for me, I gotta learn how to write stuff with detail because I'm one of the people I like answering straight up questions,
Yep.
answering the question straight up. So I
Yeah.
don't know what's the best option for me to like answer your questions without being short on the detail.
That's tricky. I did put a sample on there. I don't know if you were able to find that. I think it's in the course document page to kind of show you how much detail I think would probably be a good start. What you could also do is, you can turn them all in the day that it's due, or you can turn it in early. Like maybe turn the first one in early, and then I'll give you some feedback on it so you know like what to do on the next 2. To see if you're about right or not about right. If you don't want to risk it that much, you could just email it to me and say like, hey, look at this. What do you think I should add? You could do that too. But if you do that, did I just point my finger at you? I didn't mean to. If you do that, don't do it the day before it's due. You know what I'm saying? Like everything's due on I think it's the 18th. Don't send it at midnight on the 17th. You know what I'm saying?
Okay.
Yeah. But no, I'll try to help. Yeah. And also, yeah, the writing part's tricky, and that's going to be kind of half of the class on this one, which normally the writing part doesn't matter as much. Yeah, I know it's trickier for those of you that writing's not your favorite thing.
Yeah.
The good news is there's only one a week.
Yeah. It's like history so straightforward sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, and on this one, I think you'll have enough to talk about on this first one, because all you really have to do is see. I'm trying to make it easy. It may not be, though. I would talk about what you think went well for Reconstruction, like the good stuff, like this was good, we passed those amendments, we had this helped people in this way, this helped people in that way. And then the stuff that didn't work. And then at the end, you just make an analysis, like overall, more stuff was good than it was bad, and it allowed this to happen or that to happen. Or you could say it really wasn't great for the time period, but because we had this, in 100 years, it'll be better, or I don't know. But we'll talk about that more tomorrow, or not tomorrow, Thursday. We'll talk about that more on Thursday as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, let me see if I missed anything else. No, okay. Sorry, then we'll get, okay, so you guys, yeah. All right, now you guys should, that's a much better chat than I had in one of my classes this summer where people talked about where they can meet up for adult beverages and stuff. So it's like, yeah, good. Yeah, their grades weren't that good either. I don't know what happened. All right, so, oh, goodness. Sharecropping, we talked about that. Yeah, and crop lien, you had the bad land and you're trying to grow your crop, but you probably still don't have enough money to pay for all the stuff you need to plant your crop, because you got to have money to buy the seed. You might have to have a horse or a donkey to pull the plow, because it's a little early for mechanized plows, although that's coming up pretty quick. Buying the plow is expensive. You got to have food and water, and you got to live until the crop comes in. So you may end up having to borrow against the value of your land to get all the stuff that you need. Sorry, I'm just going to quietly cry here. Sorry. So you have to borrow against the value of your land, and that works out pretty well as long as the crop comes in. Now, if the crop does not come in, like you guys probably know, do you ever try to grow stuff? I'm not asking like illegal stuff, but have you ever tried to grow stuff at your house? Like right now, we'll talk about my yard. My yard, part of it is green and part of it is not green. So somebody, not me, paid money to put in grass and this kind of stuff, which may be a bad call in Central Texas. And some of that money has paid off and the grass has grown. Another part of that, the grass has died. So maybe I don't have money to replace the grass, which I don't and honestly wouldn't do anyway. But just because somebody planted the grass does not mean it will always grow. So if the crop does not come in my instance, it's grass. If the grass doesn't grow, then I don't have grass. So I couldn't, harvest it. Now I'm not going to harvest the grass, but you've tried to grow a garden before maybe, or you have an old relative who's a farmer or even a rancher. Sometimes just because you have animals or you have crops doesn't mean that things work out. And you can do everything you're supposed to do and it doesn't rain, or a bunch of grasshoppers come and eat your crop, or some terrible cow bug comes and kills all your cattle. Clearly, I don't know anything about ranching. But things don't always work out. And if you have a crop failure, I definitely kill the houseplants. If you have a crop failure and you have borrowed against the value of your land to put in that crop, guess what you lose when you don't get a crop? So then the bank comes in and takes your land away, and then you become a sharecropper. Yeah, so crop lien system usually just means after a failed crop or two, you become a sharecropper and someone else owns your land, usually the bank. Yeah. It's also, it's also why, like in Texas, I don't know if you know stuff like this, but they allow you to have a home equity loan, where you borrow against the value of your house to fix something in your house. But then if you can't pay back that loan, then you lose your house. So those are dangerous kinds of loans. And sometimes they're useful, but sometimes they're dangerous. And crop lien system, it's a fairly dangerous kind of loan system, which often ends up making you a sharecropper. And those loans usually work out just brilliantly for banks. Yeah, okay. All right, so what I'm trying to say, I think, is that unless you were the big landowner, you are just going to be poor in the South. That's mostly true. Now, there are a few urban areas in the South where maybe you have a business. And sometimes, everybody needs an accountant maybe during that time period, or you need a merchant to help you sell your crops or something like that. I'm not saying everybody is necessarily poor if they don't own land, but typically, if you don't own a lot of land, you're poor in the South. Maybe more options in the North where there are more cities and small towns, but the South is, it's mostly farming. And even in the North where it's still a lot of farming, there are probably smaller towns where, somebody's got to be the butcher and somebody's got a store and that, so more economic opportunity in the north. Also more education in the north, not a whole lot more, but more in that time period, which education gives you other job opportunities as well sometimes. All right, politics. I think we talked at length last time about how Andrew Johnson became president. He was chosen by Lincoln really, as a conciliation toward the South, to tell them, hey, I'm not going to be too hard on you guys because you've already suffered. And then Lincoln gets assassinated, and then Andrew Johnson becomes president. And he is a pro-slavery guy who's taking over at the end of the Civil War. It's going to cause all kinds of problems. And he is going to fight very consistently with the Congress. So lots of fighting with the Congress. Okay. So Andrew Johnson becomes president after Abraham Lincoln's assassination. He also ends up with Abraham Lincoln's cabinet, which most are holdovers from the Civil War. And of course, they're not going to have anything in common with Johnson at all, and they're going to fight a lot. A lot of the cabinet, well, all of the cabinet except one, will eventually resign. And then when Johnson tries to fire that one cabinet member, who we'll talk about here in a few minutes, that's going to cause him some problems. Okay, so Andrew Johnson from Tennessee, who said every family should have a slave to relieve the drudgery of daily life, is now president after the Civil War. Oh dear. Okay. One of the first decisions that has to be made after the Civil War and when Congress is about to come back in session is, how do we decide who is coming back for Congress in the South? And Abraham Lincoln and the Congress before the election in 1860 had a lot of discussions about this. And Abraham Lincoln wanted a plan sometimes called the 10% plan, where 10% of the voters would have to pledge loyalty to the Union. And then once 10% of the voters in your state did that, then you could hold a state election, and then you could send people to Congress. Both, you'd have your state government, but then you could send them to Washington, D.C. as well, your people in the House and your senators. And the Congress thought that that was not stringent enough because only 10%, that's not enough loyalty. So they wanted something called the Wade-Davis plan. So two senators, Wade and Davis, thought this up. And it was sometimes also referred to as the 50% plan. So 50% of the voters would have to pledge that they had never been loyal to the Confederacy, that they had never voluntarily been a part of the Confederacy. Now, to get 50% of your eligible voters to do that in a southern state is going to be difficult to do. So, there's some people who would look at that and say, well, they really didn't want the South to be able to vote again in elections. And there's possibility that that is a true statement. Lincoln thought that was too harsh, and Congress thought Lincoln's plan was too lenient. But Congress didn't care what Lincoln thought because, Congress and the president don't always get along, historically rarely. So if you're if you look at it right now and go like, this is the worst it's ever been, no, it's bad right now, but we're probably studying the worst it's ever been in U.S. history. So one of the good things about you taking this class now is you right now is you can look at it and go like, nah, could be worse. We're not in a civil war. That is true. Congress passes the Wade-Davis bill. And Lincoln, he's got a couple of choices. It's right at the end of the session. He can sign it, and then it becomes law. And the Wade-Davis is the 50% have to say they never voluntarily supported the Confederacy before the state could reconstruct their government. So Lincoln could sign it, and it becomes law. And that's, of course, how a bill becomes law. He could veto it and say, in your face, Congress, we're not doing this. And then they could quickly try to override the veto. Or because it's the end of a legislative session, he could do something called a pocket veto, where he just keeps it and lets it expire. He doesn't sign it, but he doesn't veto it. Now, if you do that any other time in a legislative session, then the bill becomes law without the president's signature. If you do it toward the end of a session, last 10 days, I believe, two weeks, then it's called a pocket veto. So it just quietly goes away. And the reason Lincoln did this is he thought, you know, we're not at a good point to compromise right now. So what we should do is just leave this alone, and then we'll deal with it when we get back. Because when we get back, we'll have all rested, we'll have had holidays with our families, the war will be over, we'll have some new legislators who maybe have new perspectives. So we'll all be in a better frame of mind when we get back, and we can deal with it. And there's a lot of wisdom in that, except Lincoln gets shot and doesn't come back. So when they come back, they've got to figure out, how are we going to let people back in the Union? How are we going to decide who gets to be a congressman from Texas or any other southern state who's now part of the Union again? Now, in the period between the inauguration, Lincoln's assassination, and then when Congress comes back in, there's a couple of months. So what happens is a bunch of these southern states send delegations to talk to Andrew Johnson, and they say, hey, we're going to have an election and we're going to send these people back to Congress. Are you okay with that? Now, the Congress before Johnson becomes president had pretty much, well, not pretty much, they had demanded that if you had been a leader in the Confederacy, that you would not be eligible to serve as a congressman. You just wouldn't. So that stipulation was in place. So what the southern states do, as they're asking to recreate their delegation, they're also asking for pardons for certain Confederates, which Johnson is going to grant. And so Johnson's going to start pardoning former Confederates, and then the southern states are going to start reconstructing their governments. So when Congress comes back into session, all of these southern delegations come in, and the northern delegations from Congress just aren't having it. It's like, nope, we didn't allow this. This is not the president's decision. This is our decision. So no, we're not swearing you in. You are not officially part of Congress. So then it's really on between Andrew Johnson and the Congress. So Congress developed something called the Military Reconstruction Act, or the Reconstruction Act of whatever year it was, 1867, I'm pretty sure. So what they end up with is what we'll think of as military reconstruction. So this divides the South into 5 military districts, where they put 5 different they are all Union generals, I think, but where they divide the South into 5 districts, and then the Congress gets to decide who is going to be the governor of each district. Ulysses S. Grant will be the most famous of all those guys, but the Congress will get to pick them rather than the southern states. The South hates this. Now, the way that I have my notes, is it like a timeline? Then no. It's actually what I've posted up here. These are my notes, and it really kind of follows along with the textbook a little bit. Yeah.
That's what I was saying. The VP happens first, and the computers. That's all I was asked. Not like a timeline. I was like, which one follows first?
Oh.
I didn't mean to put the timeline. I didn't know how to word it. But
Oh no, you're fine. No, it's just the order that the stuff's presented in the book isn't always chronological. So I mean, it really follows a little bit more with how the book presents the information. So sometimes it's chronological and sometimes it's not. But I'm just reminding you, when I say that, I'm just trying to remind you that Johnson wasn't elected president. He was elected vice president in 1860, and then Lincoln gets shot in oh, it's not 60, is it? It's 64. Cried. Kind of glad you pointed that out. Darn. 64. Yeah. I'll have to try to go back and change that. But if you guys can do that on your own notes, can I change it? It won't let me. Okay. But It should be 1864. Crud. I've used these for 2 classes and never, oh, darn. Okay. So Johnson and Lincoln get elected in 64, and then Lincoln gets shot in 65, right after a week after the inauguration. So Lincoln is elected president. Johnson's supposed to be vice president, but they push him up as president, because what else are they going to do? Later on, we'll pass an amendment that says that's what we do. So. But Johnson becomes president in 65. The Reconstruction Act is passed in, I want to say it's 67. So it takes a little while because they have a lot of arguing to do. It does. But the Reconstruction Act also says that until these southern states agree to ratify or approve the 14th and 15th Amendments, then they don't get to have their own elections. And you can probably guess how many southern states eventually ratified the 14th and 15th Amendments. And if your guess is 0, you are correct. So they never do what they're supposed to do to hold their elections. They're not doing it. Yeah, you don't tell us what to do. We weren't part of that discussion. We don't want to have blacks voting. We don't want to consider them citizens. So in the meantime, local governments in the South will start to pass restrictions on freedom for former slaves. And some of the states, some of the localities will just use what they used to have as codes of law called slave codes, and they'll just turn them into black codes. They'll even just write through the word slave and write black. And these are to limit the freedoms of former slaves. And they usually have about the same limits as they had on slaves, who occasionally could travel, away from plantations or something, but not without permission from people, maybe an escort, a proof of, who they worked for, who they were owned by in that instance. So some of those restrictions remain very similar during the period of Reconstruction. So this will add restrictions on travel. Maybe you can't travel certain places. You can only travel while the sun is up. Employment contracts are required. You have to have at least a 1-year labor contract with somebody. And if you don't, you're going to be arrested for vagrancy, for not having a job, and then you'll be forced to sign a labor contract with somebody. Now, if you work for somebody who doesn't pay you the way that they're supposed to, there really isn't much recourse for you because you can't quit. You have to stay with them. And to go to trial, you have to have somebody, like if you wanted to charge them with something, you would have to find white people who are willing to go to court on your behalf. So you're really kind of stuck with a bad employer. And what happens a lot of times is the employers, they're primarily former plantation owners, will agree with each other like, hey, I'm not going to give a job to Fred, so that way you can pay Fred whatever you want. It's like, okay, thanks for doing that. So I will hire George and I'll pay him poorly. And so you promise not to hire George. So somebody's hiring only Fred, somebody's hiring only George, and Fred and George only have one job opportunity. So it really recreates an economic condition that's pretty similar to slavery, where they're really limited where they can work, and the people who control where they work are the landowners. Now, I'm not going to suggest to you that it's exactly like slavery because, nobody owns them. They do get to choose who they live with, and people can't sell their family members. But financially, it's not dramatically different than slavery because they're probably getting paid through a sharecropping system, which probably means they never have any actual money, which means, they're always perpetually in debt. They probably aren't going to be able to own land or property or start a business or move. And I mean, if you've been poor, you can't move when you're poor. You just can't, because I know people who say yeah, if you live on the south side of Chicago, it's your own fault because you should have left, and it's a terrible neighborhood, so you need to leave. Yeah, if you're broke, you don't leave because, first and last month's rent, or, maybe you live like where I'm from, Joplin, Missouri. They pretty regularly have some pretty bad tornadoes and things, and lots of bad things happen there. But, you may not be able to move because the only place you have to live is the house that your parents had because their parents had it and it's paid for. So if your house is paid for, even if it's a really crappy little house, you're not going to leave because that's all you can afford. So people who were poor and in debt in this instance really didn't have as many opportunities to change or improve their lives. That's still kind of true. Not as true as it was back then, but you know, money does still limit your opportunities. I know you guys probably have heard that, haven't you? So, so labor contract, residence, and it really, the goal of Black codes is to restrict the freedoms of former slaves, and they're going to be pretty successful at that. They're also going to start adding restrictions on voting. And so they will say, local authorities or states will say, you can't vote unless you pay a tax, the poll, P-O-L-L tax. And then you have to pay that to vote. And if you don't pay it, then it's retroactive. So you've got to pay it all the way back to when you should have first paid it. So it's really expensive to vote if you're poor. And then you might have to pass a literacy test, which sounds like a great idea, except not everybody gets the same test. I cannot imagine how you guys would feel if I didn't give you all the exact same weekly questions and tests. My guess is some of you would think it was unfair. And let's say, because I'm probably not going to be racist because that's not my thing, but occasionally I've had people tell me, I don't think it's true, that I'm sexist. I don't think so, but I will occasionally make sexist comments, mostly just to make sure you're still paying attention. I don't mean them. I had a very nice husband. I have a dad, 3 brothers, I like them all. So, but what if I gave the girls and women, sorry, an easier test? Maybe I gave them 5 matching questions, and the rest of you, I gave 10 short answer questions. The men, I gave 10. You would be upset. It wouldn't be fair. So the literacy tests were not fair. So they might give, you know, their friends and relatives, the literacy test is sign your name on the bottom line. And if they didn't like you, the literacy test would be explain the 3rd article of the Texas State Constitution. And then they would also get to say whether you were right or wrong. So even if you were right, they can just say you were wrong. So, darn. Literacy test sounds great on the surface, but it's not a standardized test. So they were able to discriminate in how and when and where they gave the test as well. So Southern states, what I'm trying to say, worked very hard to limit the freedoms and the ability to vote for former slaves. Now, does the North want former slaves to vote? Yes, very much so. Is it because the North is more wholesome and pure than the South? I don't know. You get to decide that. I would say it's because the North knows. I know we've just personified 2 sections of the country as well, but the North knows that African Americans in the South will vote for Republicans. How does the North know this? The North knows this because Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves. Abraham Lincoln was a Republican. African Americans are going to vote for the party of Abraham Lincoln because he freed the slaves. That's the truth. Oh, and somebody's saying that the same education in the South, okay. The education thing, oh my goodness. You're right. I'm not disputing what you're saying, that Blacks didn't have the same educational opportunities as whites. There's no way, yeah, absolutely, that's true. Here's another truth. I know we talked last time about the Freedmen's Bureau and how one of their main successes was basic literacy, to try to get former slaves to the point of basic literacy that was equal to people in the South. And I may have said last time that wasn't hard. And that's true, because no offense, but the South doesn't spend crap on public education during that time period. The South still kind of underspends, but not, I mean, I really think, especially Central Texas, you have fine opportunities to go to public schools. I taught in a public school and thought they did a fine job, so I'm not saying that at all. But traditionally, the South has never spent as much as the North on education because for a variety of reasons. I won't necessarily go into all of them. But during this era, rich people in the South didn't want poor people, black or white, to have education, especially black. I'm not, I'm not trying to be flippant at all, but they really saw the economic pie as very set. So there's only a certain amount of money to go around. So necessarily, if poor people got more money, then rich people would have less. The rich people controlled the economic system, the political system, and the educational system in the South, and they wanted to stay on top. So if you're the plantation owner, you don't want a good system of public schools because that might lead to more economic opportunity for the people that you're taking advantage of. And it helps, them being poor, at least in your mind, makes you wealthier, gives you more opportunity for wealth. I don't know that a lot of people think that way in the modern era, but that's super common during that era. And they didn't necessarily see economic opportunity as necessarily growing for everyone all the time. They kind of saw economic resources as finite. So if somebody gets more money, then you will necessarily get less, if that makes sense. It's like we're all playing the giant Monopoly game and there's only a certain amount of money available. You guys play Monopoly? I may have made a really bad reference there. Do you guys even play games that aren't, what is that game you play online? Fortnite? You play Fortnite? Okay, you guys aren't going to tell me what you play. That's fine. Okay, all right, I got an answer. No Fortnite. But no, you were right about the you're right about the educational levels as well. But the truth is that literacy test thing, that doesn't get outlawed until the 1960s, till just actually right about the time I'm born. And Rosa Parks, who was an educated woman, couldn't pass her literacy test until she took a lawyer with her to observe while she took the literacy test. So they made sure, part of the reason they get rid of the literacy test is because local governments get to administer it. But they also make sure that voter registration in general becomes a federal responsibility rather than a state responsibility, which is also part of the reason that you're seeing a whole lot of argument right now about who gets to decide how people vote, when they vote, where they vote, because it really kind of harkens back to the time period we're talking about right now, where when local governments controlled voter registration, they also got to discriminate against certain voters. Now, don't misread that. I am not trying to suggest that one party or another is trying to do that right now. I'm not here to talk about politics, but I am saying that when you hear people talking about that, the reason all those laws changed was because southern states quite specifically use state law and local law to discriminate against certain groups of people. It is true. So, all right, back to business. Okay, sorry. All right, so the North does want former slaves to vote. The KKK does not. So the KKK starts during this time period for a variety of reasons, none of them noble. And one of them is to keep Black men from voting. So, their goal is to scare the life out of people or literally kill them if they try to vote. So the Congress will pass something called the Enforcement Act, the Force Act, or the KKK Act. It's all the same thing. In the Enforcement Acts are the official name, and I know that's what your book calls them. And that allows state governments, or actually those 5 military district governors, to call in the troops to protect voters on election day. Which they will do consistently during the Johnson administration, somewhat consistently during the first Grant administration, and much less frequently during the second Grant administration. So at the beginning of Reconstruction, Black men are voting safely and in large numbers. That's also the era where you'll see African American men elected to Congress in their state. There's not so many national folks. There's a handful, but in their states. And then as time goes along, there's more and more restrictions placed on Black voters. to the point where when Reconstruction ends, there are no Black men voting in the South. And you won't see Black men voting again in the South until, again, about the time I'm born, until the 1960s. And that's after a whole lot of people get killed pushing for the right to vote again, even though there is a 15th Amendment, but it's not being enforced. All right. I feel like I want to stop for just a minute and see if you guys have any questions. I know it's not, you know, we're not at the end of class yet or anything, but is there anything that any of you wanted to ask or have questions or concerns about at this moment? Oh, goodness. Also gave me a chance to drink Coke Zero, which they couldn't do back then. I cannot survive in a day without Coke Zero. All right. I don't see any questions. You guys are still with me though, right? You're not playing Fortnite, are you? Okay, now I'm glad it's making sense. Also listening to my neighbor fix his truck. Can you guys hear my neighbor fixing his truck? There was one day in the summer that he was fixing his truck and swearing. So, and you could hear that. But I think things are going better for him today. Okay, can't hear him, that's good. Do I recommend that you add lecture notes? Add to our lecture notes? Yeah, maybe. I mean, you know, you might want to have the lecture notes near you while you read the textbook. Yeah. And I know that I've put you a little bit behind on this because I haven't given you the list of stuff to study. But if you have the list of stuff to study plus your weekly questions, I mean, those are the biggest things. And I promise you, either tonight or tomorrow, you'll get the list of stuff to study. And I'll have it sooner for you on the next, you know, the next group of chapters. But yeah, I would have those things handy. I am not saying, look, I think every part of history is important. And I am always like reading something new or watching something new because I want to learn something to add to what I already know. Because, you know, history is my thing. I like it. I assume you probably don't like history quite as much as I do and may not be able to do it for a living the way that, you know, I'm fortunate to be able to do. But my thought is your main, I don't even want to say this out loud, but your main goal in this class, I would love to think it's to learn as much about history as possible, but your main goal in this class is probably to pass. So, I mean, you already know that the weekly questions are half your grade. Then when I give you that other list of stuff to study, that'll be the other half of your grade. So those things are probably, you know, the most important things to you. So I definitely have those things available to you, and make sure you read through those things. Like if you, like right now, if you don't know what the weekly questions are, dang, go back and look, make sure you know what they are. I know I've already told you the one for this chapter a bunch. Is Reconstruction a success or a failure, and why? But those weekly questions, that's half your grade. So you got to know what those things are before you do the lecture or listen to the lecture, before you read the textbook. And then the other ones, yeah, I know I need to give those to you, and I will tonight or tomorrow. Having those will be helpful as well. But those weekly questions, man, you got to know what those are. So, all right. But yeah, I think adding to your lecture notes while you read, yeah, that's good, because that way you just got the one set of notes. I like it. Makes sense. I like it. All right, anything else you want to say or ask before we get started? I'm sorry, I am so sore. All right, I'm gonna stop talking about how sore I am. Crap. Okay, getting old. I don't know, man. It's good, but it hurts. Okay, so KKK, we talked about that. Did we talk about that? Yeah, black codes, KKK. Yeah, restriction on voting. Okay, so what we need to talk about is why Congress disliked Johnson. Well, you already know he's not the president they expected. He also is a pro-slavery guy and pro-South guy, and we're no more pro-slavery, pro-South. And he swears at them all the time too. I don't know that that's necessarily why they disliked him, but he definitely dislikes them and makes sure they know it. Also, when they pass bills, you know what he does? He vetoes them. Dang. So he's going to veto more bills than anybody ever had before. And they are going to override more vetoes than have ever been overridden before as well. So it's really just on between Congress and Johnson. You know, it starts off with Johnson allowing certain representatives back in Congress that the Congress doesn't want. So Congress dissolves that Congress and says start over, and then they do the military reconstruction thing. They don't like that he vetoes laws to things like the Civil Rights Act, or to fund the extend funding on the Freedmen's Bureau. So he's going to veto bills that they agree on, and then they override the vetoes. And they get, he vetoes the Enforcement Act, the KKK Act, and they override that as well. So their thought is, you know what, this guy's annoying. We just have to get rid of him. Let's impeach him. So they decide they're going to impeach him. Now, impeachment's when you try to kick someone out of office or you censure them for something they did while they were in office. And if you're wondering, have they tried to impeach a president before this? No, they had not. Had they ever impeached anyone before this? Yes, they had. In the early days, I'm talking Jefferson presidency, they impeached some judges. They impeached a guy named, I don't know why I remember stuff like this. Oh, because I'm a history teacher, Samuel Pickering. But it's mostly, he was a federal judge and he went to work drunk, you know, sometimes, which is not ideal. I've never done that. I'm going to, advise you not to do that as well. But crud, if you're a federal judge and you're ruling on stuff and you're drunk, that's not cool. So, you know, that's fairly easy to impeach a guy for that. They tried to impeach a Supreme Court justice named Samuel Chase, but he was sober. They just didn't like him. So they didn't like him politically. He was a little more of a federalist. He wanted a stronger central government than the Democratic Republicans, who become Republicans and then eventually Democrats. Oh my gosh, how confusing is that? But he was of a different party and had a different philosophy. So they tried to impeach him, but then the Senate kind of pushed back on that. So this is going to be the first time they're going to try to impeach a president. Now, to impeach someone, they typically need to break a law. Typically. They do need to break a law. Now, Johnson's super annoying, but he hadn't broken any laws. So they decide they'll pass a law that they know he'll break. So they set him up, which, you know, I guess if you're in charge of Congress and you want to impeach somebody, you can probably do this. So they did. They passed something called the Tenure of Office Act. Tenure of Office Act. Sorry, I scrolled a little there. There it is. Tenure of Office Act. Now, tenure means length of office. And what this act says is if somebody gets their job through Senate approval, like they get appointed and then the Senate has to confirm the appointment. So cabinet members, primarily secretaries, that sort of stuff, Supreme Court justices, then they cannot be fired unless the Senate also approves their firing. Now, there's very little chance that that would have been seen as constitutional. They passed the law. Oh, somebody's coming in. They passed the law, and then Johnson, of course, vetoes the law because he disagrees with it, and then they override the vetoes. Now, part of the reason that they do this is they know that Johnson is planning to fire the Secretary of War, a fellow named Edwin Stanton. And Edwin Stanton's kind of hard to get along with. He was hard for Lincoln to get along with. But he's the only guy left from Lincoln's original cabinet, and he really just gets on Johnson's nerves. So Johnson's going to fire him. So Congress essentially passes the "You Can't Fire Edwin Stanton" law, Tenure of Office Act. So he vetoes it, they override the veto, He fires Edwin Stanton, and then they go, it's on, let's impeach Andrew Johnson. Now, the way impeachment works, and we'll talk about this at least 2 more times because we're going to try to impeach 2 more presidents. Yes, but not for a while. So the way impeachment works is the Congress then gets to decide are we kicking the president out. So let me peek, see if there's a good question there. Oh yeah, there's, yeah, people, yeah, Trump, we could talk a little about Trump as far as impeachment goes as well. That was interesting. It was. I was thinking more about Nixon, who didn't quite get impeached, but could have. And would have if he hadn't resigned. And then the other fellow, Clinton, who did get impeached but not kicked out. So that's what happens to Johnson as well. But yeah, Trump's making history, isn't he? Yeah, that's true. We'll get to talk about him before it's over as well. But Andrew Johnson, impeachment, sorry. 2 houses of Congress, you got the House of Representatives and the Senate. And the House is where there's a whole bunch of people and they all serve 2-year terms. So those guys are always having to do exciting stuff so people will notice them and they'll get reelected. So that's why usually the House is big on impeachment. It's like, I'm going to show the voters that I mean business. So almost always the House wants to impeach somebody and kick them out, but the Senate goes like, nope, my term's 6 years and I want to stay. So those guys tend to be more conservative. They tend to make fewer, and I don't mean they tend to be more Republican. I mean, they tend to want to make fewer extreme decisions. So they're more likely to stick with the status quo, where the House is always doing crazy stuff. It's like if you taught high school, the House would be a bunch of 9th graders, and then the Senate's a bunch of seniors. Seniors are going like, man, I'm almost done. I just don't want to mess anything up. The 9th graders like, woohoo, I can't go to jail for anything. I'm 14, and they do all kinds of stupid stuff. Trust me on that if you ever teach high school. 9th graders, they're amazing. So the House part, the 9th grade part of the Congress, like, let's kick him out. So what they do is they're the ones who decide whether or not you want to try to kick the president out. So they're like a grand jury. I hope you haven't participated in the legal process very much, but you have a grand jury who decides if there's going to be an indictment, are we going to bring charges against someone? And so the House is like the grand jury, are we going to charge them with stuff? And then the Senate is where they have the trial. So the House almost always, when it's impeachment time, is like, yeah, let's go, because they're rowdy. So the House says, yeah, let's go, let's have the trial. And then the Senate holds the trial, and then the Senate decides, are we going to kick this guy out? And they do tend to be longer term politicians. And I think one of the thoughts that they get sometimes is, if I did this, or if I got caught doing this, because a lot of times they probably did do something similar to what they're about to try to impeach somebody for, would I want to be kicked out for it? Would it be fair? And they almost always decide no. Well, in this instance, the Senate knows that they've passed an unconstitutional law. The House does too, they just don't care. And then the impeachment managers for the Senate meet with Andrew Johnson's lawyers, and they come to a compromise. Andrew Johnson's lawyers say, look, he's got like 8 months left on his term. If he just promises to stop giving you guys crap and to calm down, will you guys decide not to kick him out? And they go like, yeah, that sounds cool to us. So they decide not to kick him out. And then the term ends relatively peacefully, much more so than it had proceeded before. And then Andrew Johnson gets impeached but not convicted. So they go through the full process, but he doesn't get convicted. The Senate says, nah, let's just keep him in. So he finishes his term. If you're Andrew Johnson, are you running for another term? He's not. He's out. He's like Joe Biden. No, Joe Biden. Joe Biden said yesterday he might run for a second term if he gets the first one. But yeah, Johnson's not old either. I know Biden's old. I know Trump's old too. Don't get upset with me. I already told my dad if I'm going to vote for a senior citizen, I'm voting for him. But I don't know why we need a president who's 80, but there you go. Okay, sorry. I said I wasn't going to talk about politics, but there I just did. Johnson's not that old. He just knows That presidency didn't go well. He's not favored. He had no chance of being reelected. Even his own party wouldn't have nominated him. So Johnson goes back to Tennessee, and you know what he does? He runs for Congress, and he actually gets elected. So Johnson's one of those, there's like two presidents that come back and serve in the Congress. Huh, somebody's coming in now. Johnson was one of them, and this will be your trivia question for the day. You ready? Who's the other president who, after his presidency, serves in the Congress? Let's see if somebody knows. No, you think Obama will? I always wondered if Obama would try to be on the Supreme Court. By the way, I know that Trump won't nominate him. I just want to say. So the impeachment, you're right, the impeachment against Johnson didn't work. Mrs. Clinton does come and serve in Congress. That's true. And then she becomes Secretary of State. That's a smart guess, though. Yeah, I think Obama's done as well. Yeah, Adams, you're right. It's John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams is a weird dude. I wish, it was 1301 and we could talk about him. Because he's like a super quirky professor sort of dude that becomes president. I like him. He's weird. He's irritating. But yeah, shoot. If I'm the Obamas, I'm never going back to D.C. Yeah, no, I had a good time. I'm out. So, yeah, can we talk about our families? I got relatives who are, we're going to say, conservative. And they're super like, I know Michelle Obama's going to run for president. It's like, why in the world did Michelle Obama run for president? One, she's not a politician. Two, she hated politics. And three, I think she's having a good time. So, yeah, if I'm Michelle Obama, I'm not running for president anyway. You don't want me for president either. So, yeah, you don't. Just trust me. Okay, so Johnson, the impeachment thing doesn't work, as one of you asked. The impeachment thing does not work against Andrew Johnson the way that it intended, but it does calm Andrew Johnson down, and he stops vetoing stuff, which might have been part of the plan anyway, maybe. I don't know. At least it's part of the Senate's plan. The House, they just like to blow stuff up because that's the way the House works. You don't believe me on that. Pay a little more attention to the different sides of Congress and see which one acts crazier. Yeah. Okay. My opinion. You don't have to agree. All right. Thing you do have to agree on, because it's a fact, is Ulysses S. Grant becomes president after. Why is that thing up there? Ulysses S. Grant becomes president after Johnson. Okay. Yeah, no, if I'm the Obamas, I'm not coming back either. All right. So Grant becomes president. He had been, you know what Grant was, maybe? Yeah, he was the head of the Union Army. It's the guy they decided on after about 5 commanders, but a good decision, and he leads the Union Army to victory in the Civil War. He'd be a guy, if you like military history, there's something fairly recent written about Grant. I want to say, was it that guy that, God, what is that guy's name? I don't know why I can't think of that guy's name. It's a pretty well-known historian who writes lots of books. He wrote 1776, and he wrote the John Adams biography. I can't think of his name. I'll think of it later. But somebody has written about Grant recently and about what a good tactician he was, which is not, historically the story about Grant. Usually people go like, Lee was much smarter, Grant was just a drunk loser, that kind of stuff. That's way too harsh on Grant. But anyway, Grant becomes president. He's pretty well respected. Plus, the North really still controls the election process because the southern states haven't really been reintroduced into the process fully. So Grant becomes president, and his presidency is mostly scandalous, even though he is not. And if you're wondering, can that happen? Yeah, I guess so, because it did. At this point, I know, because some of you are going to like, no, she doesn't even know that Grant drank too much. I do know this, but by the time he's president, he's kind of cut that out. He's kind of George W. Bush in that way, where Bush got sowed all his wild oats before he became president, because, he used to drink too much and then stopped it so his wife wouldn't divorce him, essentially. Good call, Laura Bush. And then when he became president, there's no alcohol at the party, so people were mad. They were mad that he got sober. Can you believe that? But Grant apparently had drinking problems before the Civil War, but had solved those afterwards. But so he's an honorable guy. He makes decent decisions, I suppose, except about who his advisors are. Apparently, he picks a lot of scandalous advisors, and you'll see many scandals during the Grant administration, very few of which we're going to discuss. I mean, we may talk about them a little bit next time, because I know, by the way, I've got to stop here in a minute, but Grant serves 2 terms as president. And what you see is a declining desire by the Republican Party to protect former slaves in the South. So you're going to see, rapid decline in voting, in protection, in rights for former slaves during the Grant administration, especially in the second one. So I think I'll just stop sharing there, because I know I didn't realize it is almost time to go. V. Obama, you guys are funny. All right. Michael. I liked Bush too, though. I don't know. I think Trump is interesting. Trump is just so puzzling to me historically. Trump is just puzzling. I don't want to say anything bad or good. I think Biden's a little puzzling too, though. So I'm confused. All right. So before we go, because we need to go pretty soon, right? Do you guys have any questions that you want to ask? Now, next time, I'll talk a tiny bit about Grant, but for our purposes, and no offense if you're related to Grant or Grant's your favorite president, we're going to probably not spend much time on Grant. So apologies to our favorite Civil War general, potentially. But we'll spend more of our time next time talking about whether Reconstruction was a success or failure. So do you have questions? You guys are going to keep commenting about the Obamas. Wouldn't you be on vacation, though, after 8 years of... I don't know why anybody runs for president. I really don't. Because what a terrible job. I mean, honestly. Everybody hates you. No, just half the country. Everybody's paying attention to you. Crud if you have kids. They're giving you kids crap. It's not good. It's not good. All right. Do you guys have questions, comments? No more Obama comments. I mean, you can. All right. What are you saying?
Oh, sorry. I just had a question. So, you said that a paper. You said about paper you're gonna have to study on.
Are you asking about? Okay.
Because I have to say something like tell us what to study.
The stuff to study. Yeah. I will either put that on Blackboard tonight or tomorrow, because I finished writing your quiz, the one that you do on the 18th, whatever day that is. Let me look at I keep saying I don't know what day it is because I have to grade it. I mean, I should pay some attention. Yes, the 18th. So on the 18th, 16th, 17th, or 18th, you got to do this quiz. And it'll be over the 3 chapters, 15, 16, and 17. So I will give you a list. I wrote that quiz over the weekend. So I will give you a list of things I would study if I were you to prepare for that quiz. Also, this seemed to be confusing to a few people over the summer. That quiz is not the same as your weekly questions. So the fact that you did your weekly questions does not mean you are necessarily prepared for the quiz. I mean, that probably help you, but it won't be the only thing. Because somebody got mad at me this summer. It's like, yeah, hardly any of that stuff was on the quiz. It's like, yeah, I told you that. Okay. So the homework is all technically not due until the 18th either, but you can turn those questions in whenever you like. So there's 1 per week. Ideally, I think I would turn in the first weekly question, this weekend, the second weekly question next week, Thursday, Friday or Saturday. And then that third weekly question, you have to turn in on the 18th. But the reason I would turn them in one at a time is that way they're not all 3 due while you have that quiz, and you're not all creating all this extra pressure for yourself. Does that make sense? So nothing, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Nope.
I was trying. So on the weekly question, chapter 15, those are more than 1 question. I thought we could only do write a paragraph and that's it.
1 question. The question is, was Reconstruction a success or a failure? That's it. And then next week, I honestly don't remember what your question is. But there's one question each week, and it's really specifically about the chapter we're going over.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And you turn those in individually, but you can turn them all in on the 18th, or you can turn them in before.
Okay.
So on the 18th, you have 3 questions due, which you could turn in early or you can turn in on the 18th. And you'll have your quiz that'll be due. And that quiz will be 8 to 10 questions over all 3 chapters. And I'll give you the list tonight or tomorrow about stuff you should study.
Okay.
And if you forget that, it also says that in the syllabus, but in the section where it talks about grades. But I mean, you can ask as well. I won't get too mad, I don't think. All right. So the homework is due on the 18th as well, but you can turn it in sooner. All right. Do you guys have other questions? Meaning of life? How to avoid COVID? I don't know, man. Wear a mask? I don't know. I know people that got it and they wore masks. So. I'm not saying don't. Go ahead, ask your question. Oh, crud, I need to stop recording. If I'm saying
Is it yes or no to the weekly question?
yes or no?
Yeah.
Yes, there is a weekly question.
No, I mean,
Oh.
like, what's the answer?
Was Reconstruction successful? I'm sorry. It's yes and no. We're going to talk really, my opinion, yours doesn't have to be. You can make an argument that, nope, it was crap, and you could make it successfully. You could also make an argument, no, it was a great success, and I think you could make that successfully as well. However, we will talk very, very specifically about that question on Thursday. That'll be the main thing we talk about on Thursday.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry I didn't understand your question, but I got it now. So yeah, the homework is the weekly question. Yes. Yes. Okay, anything else you want to ask? All right. Crud, I didn't stop recording. I'm going to stop.